that we have the new Tasneem here from DIA Houston. She is the new ED, Executive Director. Welcome, Tasneem. We are so excited to have you here.
Thanks for having us.
Hey. Only if you have like one of those like
I
buttons
know.
that has on the clap.
Yeah.
So like clapping for you. Welcome to Chai Time. We're so excited to have you here. So before we begin, I always like to start the show off with a nice little quote to kind of set the mood of what the topic is about today. So you are stronger than you know, braver than you believe, and more resilient than you can imagine. Every step you take towards healing is a step towards reclaiming your power. I thought that was just such a beautiful quote. I'm sure you've probably heard of this. There's a similar quote in Dr. Seuss, I think.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if that one is from Dr. Seuss. But anyway, so today our topic is on domestic violence, and Tasneem is here from DIA Houston, as I mentioned, to speak about it. So before we begin the questionnaire, I want to ask you what I would like you to tell us a little bit about yourself and what brought you to DIA.
Yeah, well, I've been watching on the sidelines. DIA is very near and dear to my heart as this cause. I was working with Chetna and Dallas for many years, and have been working in like child protective services and domestic violence organizations, and then more recently at a food bank. So social services kind of runs in my blood, and this cause, as for most of us, like touches me in different ways. And so I'm happy to be here and happy to be a part of the mission and the work that we're doing.
Wow. And so I hear that you are from Texas, but not from Houston.
Yeah, well, I was born in Canada, but I've lived most of my life in the Dallas area since I was 5. So Dallas has been home, but now Houston will be.
Yeah, well, welcome to traffic. So I wanted to ask you actually, what it is something that you are looking forward to at DIA, and what are you excited about?
I think all of it. Honestly, I have an amazing staff and support system, and so I'm happy to kind of get to know them. The community already has been so welcoming, so ready to just dive into the South Asian community in Houston and get to know like our specific needs and work with just greater awareness and prevention efforts.
Wow. And those of you that are on Facebook Live, the other person on our show which is Misbah. She is also from DIA Houston. Misbah, you want to talk about a little bit about what you do at DIA?
Yeah. Hi, everybody. My name is Misbah. My pronouns are they, them, and I'm the outreach coordinator at DIA. So if you see a social media post, it's probably me behind it. So if you hate it, don't tell me. But if you love it, please tell me and put it in my inbox. But I would be the person who typically does a lot of the community front-facing efforts. So if you see me at an event, I'm probably wearing a DIA shirt. I am a very big introvert otherwise.
Oh, okay. Well, welcome. And this is the first time I'm meeting you.
Yeah,
It is so nice to meet you. So what are some unique barriers and challenges that South Asian immigrant survivors of domestic violence face?
There's quite a lot, and so typically when we talk about domestic violence in the mainstream, you'll have your physical abuse, emotional, psychological, sexual, all of that. But in the South Asian community, we also see unique types of abuse, such as in-law abuse. A lot of times, either the survivors, like family or in-laws, are also perpetrating the abuse or keeping the relationship together. There are complexities of children that are born here in the United States, and like kind of the barriers for our clients, like having those types of cases and then wanting to maybe go back home to their families, but being unable to do so because the kids are U.S. born.
Yeah.
There's transnational abandonment. I could go on and on. We have so many barriers that we face for our clients. A lot of them are highly educated and come here with sometimes dependent status to their spouse, and so leaving becomes an obstacle there if they don't have legal employment in the U.S. Not speaking the language, not understanding the culture and the laws here are all like barriers that we face.
Yeah, and especially I think I'll talk about like the language part, where it's like we are really, really concerned with how a lot of the times even the English that we use is so particular when you need to talk to a system, right? So like who I don't even know what, like, all of these IRS forms, right? Like, when you're filing out taxes, how would you even know that when you're from a different country that's English speaking, let alone that's not English speaking?
Yeah.
And so that's something that we at DIA really, like, prioritize ourselves about, is like speaking languages that are not English and actually decentering English in certain ways, and also kind of navigating those systems in America that exist that, again, like taxes. Like, I don't know why I'm thinking about taxes today, but that would be something that we would help with. Protective orders, which we will, I think, maybe later touch on when it comes to the legal system, the courts.
Wow. You know, every time we think about domestic violence, the thought that goes into our head is like, okay, well, then just leave. Why can't you just walk away? Like, why are you taking this abuse? But we don't realize that the person that is dealing with it, it's just so much harder. It's easier said than done.
Absolutely. And typically, even in the mainstream population, like survivors will leave 7 times and then go back because there are so many barriers, like not having a job, not having legal representation, things like that. And so it's, I'd love to change the rhetoric around this subject, because that's the most commonly asked question, is like, why doesn't the survivor leave? And we really want to change the way we look at that and put the onus back on the perpetrator. Like, why do they do what they do?
Exactly.
And how do we get support for their survivors to kind of, at DIA, we don't try to make decisions on whether someone should stay or leave. We just try to reach them where they are and provide any type of safety resources to keep them safe in the situation, whether they stay or leave.
Wow. So how does DIA support the survivors of abuse in a culturally specific manner?
Yeah, so we provide language and culturally specific services, including case management, counseling, legal advocacy, financial advocacy, like any type of education that a client will need. Basically, holistic services from the point that they are even coming forward on that first hotline call, all the way through. They're now like fully independent, have houses and jobs and all of that.
Wow. So it's like a full service of everything.
Absolutely.
Like, even to parlay G in our like Monday that we call it, where it's like, if a client wants or needs food that's culturally specific, we have that too, down to massage.
Wow. Wow, that's amazing. So October is Domestic Violence Awareness Month. Can you tell us a bit about the activities that are going on this month?
Yeah, so we have an interfaith vigil at United Way on the 11th. Let me not misspeak. Sometime in the next, I have all of my dates. It's this Thursday. Okay, it is the 11th. Okay, I don't want to get my dates wrong one bit. We do a bunch when it comes to like training. So every week, or like, actually this month it's like maybe once or twice a week, we're out in the community doing trainings to different nonprofits or organizations that are federal or local government, or really just social service staff who engage with domestic violence populations or South Asian populations. So that's something that's going on. What else do we got going on? I have to like sometimes look at my calendar. But the Interfaith Vigil is a great way for everybody to kind of come together at a place, really understand that domestic violence is something that happens to everybody, and that it is a cross-communal, cross-cultural issue. And so everybody has to come together and really like take a moment to say that it's taking lives, and it is also a moment to just reflect and see what we can do better in our community. So that's a great way for people to come out and show up and show support.
I love that.
And we'll have all of the links on our socials.
Okay.
Check out our social media. I'm Dia Houston everywhere.
You know, it's so sad because we come from a culture where there's so much ashamed that is that's there with anything that has to do with your family. Like, you cannot speak up. You can't talk about it. If you're being abused, we'll deal with it. Like, you cannot talk about it. And I feel like with you guys coming on the show and you're saying it's okay, like, we're here to help you, we're here to stand by you. I love that because there's so many people out there that are going through this on the daily, and they need so much. They need so much support, and I love that Daya Houston is, a great avenue for them.
Absolutely, we're definitely here to provide that voice for them and to be here to listen and support and handhold through the process. And we really do want to reduce that stigma, because feeling like you're in this situation and you don't have anyone that you can talk to, like isolation is such a big form of abuse, isolating from friends, from family, from all social avenues of one's life is really prevalent in these types of situations. And so at Daya, we really do want to be that voice piece for people, so that they understand that, they aren't alone.
Yes, absolutely. What do you wish people understood about domestic violence?
Oh my gosh, again, back to that, the point of it isn't easy to leave. It is not easy. I worked at a mainstream shelter, and we would have people come, for these facilities. They are so short term. Like, you can stay there for 30, 60, 90 days. We don't want to advise anyone to go stay with their family members when they're in this situation, because you're putting your family and yourself at greater risk, because the abuser may know where you're located. So, there's just so many like barriers that are there in terms of just even making that first move. Where do I go? How do I, what do I take with me? What do I, leave behind? What do I do with my kids? We have joint custody. What does the legal system look like? There's more questions than there are answers when you're in that situation and you don't know what to do. And so, I caution everyone to, again, really question why we ask, why does this person stay? Because ultimately that may be their goal to leave, but it's so many steps along the way to get them there, really.
And on kind of the flip side, I would also say that abuse can happen to anybody by anybody. And I think that's something that we often forget. And again, when earlier Disney mentioned about in-law abuse, where it's like you wouldn't the typical way that people expect abuse to work is like from a male partner to a female partner, which is completely untrue. Like, it really can happen to anybody by anybody, and it could happen in any class, it can happen at any immigration status, it can happen to any race, any gender, anybody. And I think that's also something that we often forget, is that when we have a certain look of what abuse looks like, we kind of actually end up not looking at so many other people who are experiencing that, and kind of isolating them in a completely different way, because they don't match our expectations of what abuse can look like or should look like.
Yeah, and as Ms. Beth said, it affects all of us. We've seen the most highly educated, affluent people, and then the opposite. And it can happen with males and females. A lot of times we are gender specific and we say she a lot, because 96-7% of our cases are female, but I think that honestly that's because males are not coming forward. I think that those numbers are very underreported. If you look at national statistics, it says 1 in 3 women and 1 in 4 men. So a quarter of the population facing this, and that's nationally. Sometime in their lifetime, we are going to face it. And so it isn't just a female issue or concern. It is affecting people of all genders, races, socioeconomic, educational backgrounds.
Yeah. Oh wow. Okay. So what are the different forms of domestic violence?
Yeah. So it can manifest in so many different ways. You have, physical abuse, which is physical aggression towards somebody else. It could be pushing, slapping, choking, hitting, all of those things. And it can also be the threat of doing that, the threat of violence, the threat of having a gun or having a gun in the home. Weapons are used as well. Then there's psychological, emotional abuse, which is harder to detect, but is so much more damaging, I think, to anyone going through it. This is, calling names, really bringing down someone's self-esteem, publicly or privately, shaming them, guilting them, there's isolation, really just isolating them over time from like their friends, their family, their coworkers, any support system that they may have outside of the home. And then there's sexual abuse, and a lot of times this again is misreported or underreported because I think, especially in our culture, we have sometimes these ingrained ideas that sex within a marriage is a requirement, and so consent has to happen every single time, and so when that doesn't happen every single time, then that becomes sexual abuse as well.
And then the taboo of having sex outside of marriage that still exists, and so underreporting when it comes to that, because you may be experiencing that, but you can't report it because of all of these other barriers that exist.
Yeah. And now in this day and age, we have things like spiritual abuse. So using religious texts to kind of keep someone in a relationship, or the religious community, it's against God or our religion to leave the relationship.
Wow.
That's a common type of abuse as well, especially culturally for us. Economic abuse is huge too. That is probably one of the biggest barriers to leaving is financial abuse, and that looks like, again, if I came here on a dependent status with my spouse, then I don't have access to the bank accounts. Like I could not start. I don't have any credit in my name. I can't work. I don't have the legal status to work. Maybe I have the legal status to come here dependent to that visa, but not independently. So that's a big type of abuse. There's even technological abuse nowadays.
Blocking somebody's contacts, looking at their emails, controlling what you see on social media. There's so much. There's so many. They're smart. It's very, very sneaky, scary, calculated. I say sneaky, scary, but it's very calculated ways that abuse shows up, which is why I say literally anybody could experience abuse by anybody.
And those are just the mainstream. Then you get into the cultural barriers and forms of abuse that we mentioned before, and it just is very complex for someone in the South Asian community or that's in the immigrant population to leave safely.
It's funny because we've been doing this show for about 7 years now, and we always have a show on domestic violence, the month of Domestic Violence Awareness Month. And every single time my mind is blown, and I'm just like, wow, I would never have imagined some of the things and we talk about this so often, but yet every time I learn new information.
I've been working in the field for 15 years, and I can tell you that every day I'm learning something new, a new type of abuse, a new type of barrier that our clients face.
And I feel like those that are going through this abuse probably don't even realize that they're being abused in certain
Absolutely.
Technology abuse, I would never even, or was it technology?
Yeah,
that's
technology.
Spiritual abuse.
Spiritual abuse. I would have never.
Having to convert to another religion because you can't practice your own, because there's so many ways that spiritual abuse can even show up.
And then just the stigma in our culture of what will people say?
Yes.
That is probably a big question. What will my own family say? What will my friends say? Am I bringing shame upon my family by coming forward? And it's a very difficult situation to be in. I think that's what I'd like people to understand the most is it is beyond anything you would imagine in terms of difficulty, and we have to have a level of grace for people that are going through this.
Absolutely. Wow. So how does domestic violence affect children in the household?
This is a cause very near and dear to me. I've worked with kids in foster care, and the majority of them came from situations where domestic violence was in the home. Statistics show anywhere from 40 to 80% of children that are growing up in domestic violence situations are also victims of child abuse, and so the two are completely correlated. So when you talk about kids, their brains are still molding and forming at those young ages, right? They're sponges. And we've seen, people say, oh, they're just a baby. Even when parents are fighting in the household, it's like, oh, we're in a different room. They
Yeah.
can't hear us, or they're not aware. No, these kids,
They hear everything.
they hear everything, they absorb everything, and then this is how
Sometimes they
they're
even
learning.
sense it. Like, parents have
Absolutely.
problems. I can sense it.
Absolutely, they can totally sense the emotions of their parents,
True.
and then that internalizes with them. And so we've seen babies, there have been studies that have shown that, like, out of the youngest to the eldest kids, it's usually the younger kids that then end up manifesting behavioral, developmental problems, like in adolescence.
Yeah.
Absolutely, and so they're having aggressive behaviors, or they're having like withdrawal and depression, like the flip side of it. It can affect their health, it can affect their mental health, and it happens more often than not. And then there's the intergenerational cycle of violence.
Yes.
And so, I think in a home, there are two primary victims, really. It's the person being abused and the children themselves, because a lot of times, and this happens for boys and girls, where they'll see a type of coping that's maladaptive, like abuse, and then they'll start mimicking it, or they'll think that that is what the norm is, and they'll end up in relationships where they're witnessing or experiencing that abuse later in life. And so,
Wow.
cycle. It is a cycle.
Yeah.
It is a cycle, and at some point we would like to break that cycle.
That starts now.
That starts
Yes.
now. Every day for
Yes.
us is a
Yes.
mission. Yeah.
Yes. Ugh. Like children, obviously, I think that's just a weak spot for all of us mothers or non-mothers or parents in general. And I just, every time I hear about like children having to face any kind of abuse, it just
Yeah.
it boils me from the inside, and I just want to do something about it.
Yeah.
So, what resources are available for victims of domestic violence at DIA?
Yeah, I mean, we have, are well connected in the community. Like I said, we offer case management, so that's really, from that first helpline call, we'll kind of assess someone's needs, understand where they are. Again, we don't direct them one way or the other. They may come to us and just want to have that first conversation. They may be nowhere near leaving, and so we kind of talk through with them. We'll always safety plan on that call, because we don't know if they're ever going to call back again, if they're going to have that courage. Our helpline advocate is amazing, I have to say, with the heart of gold, and really knows how to speak to that individual. And so she's comforting, and she'll provide like information and resources, but really will just listen as well. And then we safety plan, which really just means like, okay, you're in this situation, how do you stay safe, at home? And it can be anywhere from like, unfortunately, like if you're in a physical incident and something happens, then go try to find a part of the house to run to that isn't the kitchen where there's weapons, or how to keep, numbers safe in their phone or memorized, having a bag packed and stuff in case anything with important documents, if anything arises. Then we safety plan with them when they're getting ready to leave. We help them locate like safe housing and things like that. And then after they've left the relationship, safety planning that includes like how to stay safe when you're co-parenting and things like that, when you have court dates. So that's just like kind of the initial call, and then we'll have case management services throughout that kind of really helps someone think through their goals. This month I need to think about getting a place to live and employment and childcare. So really our case managers help them like identify their goals and then work towards those goals. And either we can provide services in-house, or we have a lot of community partners that we then refer out to help find jobs, develop resumes, build skill sets, things like that. And then counseling. Counseling is such a big piece of what we do, because everyone in this situation really is going to need multiple rounds of counseling, like when they're in the relationship, when they're getting ready to leave, even during the court case is so traumatic to have to relive all of those experiences. And then after the fact, now I'm independent and single, but I'm a single parent now. How do I do this on my own? And then, even when someone gets into a new relationship, which is usually further down the line, but lots of points at which like someone going through this needs to go through counseling. And so we are there do EMDR, which is eye movement desensitization. I will look up the exact name, but it's an
we literally
amazing.
talked about it
Yes,
last
we
week,
just
and
did.
I don't remember.
Desensitization response, I believe, but it's basically like reprogramming those thoughts that it's used with like post-traumatic stress survivors, and so it helps them reprogram their thoughts in a way that's less negative, so that they can, you know, approach them and like move on from them.
Oh wow.
And so it's been really useful. It was used first with like in war veterans, and then was adapted to be used with trauma victims as well. So it's been around for a while now, 30 years or more, and has been really successful with DV victims.
I'm gonna have you hold that thought real quick.
Yeah.
We're gonna take a real quick break. You are listening to your Chai Time Girls on 103.5 Hum FM. We'll be right back. Welcome Houston back to Chai Time here on 103.5 Hum FM. For those of you that have just tuned in, we are in conversation with Daya Houston, Misbah and Tasneem. And we are talking about domestic violence. So, what legal protections are available for victims of domestic violence?
Yeah, so there are protective orders, and a lot of you have probably heard of like restraining orders. So it's similar, but it's different. It's specifically for victims of, you know, domestic violence and abuse. The problem is with them is like you have to show basically physical violence, and usually you have to show like documentation. And so I caution people. So what it is you would go to court, and typically the district attorney would represent you in seeking out this type of protection. And similar to a restraining order, it protects your home and your place of work, and sometimes the children's schools and things like that. And so like the abuser would then, depending on what's written into the order, couldn't come within 500 feet of where you live or work or whatever. But again, I caution this piece of protection because in most cases, again, victims don't usually make police reports, or they don't, you know, document or let their friends know. And so the burden of that proof then falls on them. And so when they can't show that, then unfortunately they aren't able to access it. And then when they do access it, it is good because it's documented, it's in the system. But then it's how well someone will use it. And so sometimes, let's say you have kids in a school, a lot of schools aren't going to act on it because it's joint conservatorship, right? And so schools or daycares have said to us that they're hesitant to get involved or in the middle, even when a protective order exists. Yeah, and then there's just the complexity of like reporting it. If it's, at the end of the day, it's a piece of paper. When whatever is happening, it's not going to protect you in that moment. It's more retroactive, unfortunately.
Yeah, and then these are not like legal protections per se, but something that we do at DIA that we've kind of touched on is that we do provide, we have a legal like hub essentially that we have, and through that we can get survivors on a different visa status, and so that's a legal protection technically, like because that protects you from the abuser in many ways, and you can be separated in that way, right, legally. And that's one thing that I really want to showcase is that like there are other forms of legal protections that we have, like divorce. Divorce is one that we often sometimes talk about and do for our survivors, is help with divorce proceedings, and that also is not a legal protection per se, but it gets you that freedom if you want it, and if that's something that's desired for you.
Yeah, we have an amazing legal advocate, and most of our case managers are somewhat trained in legal advocacy as well, and so they will handhold someone through the entire process of like divorce, immigration hearings, and things like that. And then we will work with attorneys for like pro bono or low bono cases, and even provide retainers to those attorneys to kind of help initiate those legal proceedings. But they're costly and they're lengthy, another barrier for our cases is, divorces. If anyone's been through a divorce, they know that could take, 1 to 2 years at least. When you throw in domestic violence and those complexities, it can sometimes take 3-4 years. And so that gets so costly to the person that's kind of going through it. And so we try to provide the resources that we can. As Misbah said, there are legal protections for individuals going through like immigration cases. So there's the Violence Against Women's Act, the VAWA, and then there's the U visa. And so those are things that we help them file when, again, they're here on some sort of dependent status because they're a victim of violence. They may qualify for either, and so that can help them then get independent status from their spouse. Now again, it's costly and it's lengthy and it's not always assured. So we're talking about a lot of money and several years, where then the victim basically can't work and can't sustain their own finances, and so it's very, very difficult.
Yeah. Well, also one of the things that when the topic of legal comes out is also thinking about the length of how long it takes. That time also needs to be spent to create an alternate form of community, right? And so there's so many other things that are necessary for a person when it comes to like their needs, like literally housing, food, like shelter. That's food, that's housing, but like community even. Like I think about community as a form of a need, where it's like talking to your friends again and having that support so you are able to then fight that legal battle, because we don't again want to, like, though it's hard and though it costs a lot of money, we know it's possible and we know that that's a need for our survivors. The thing is that sometimes we want to have that community to support you and really like be able to really withstand and really go through that process with all of your village behind you, you know?
And at Thea, we are a village.
Yeah, we really are.
A village and that support system. And we kind of embrace, we talk about what's different at Thea versus the mainstream population. I've worked in the mainstream shelters and their services are limited to like 3 months, 6 months sometimes. We stay with them their entire journey for years, and even after through their successes. And so,
Wow. I knew a person that actually was going through domestic violence, and she tried to get help. She took her kids and went to a shelter, and right then that same night she went back to her abuser just because she was afraid, and it was a different environment. She had 2 kids with her, and so after that we lost touch. But so I'm not sure what happened with her now, but so it's sad to see, like you said, it takes 7 times before they actually make that decision. Sometimes it's too late, right?
And I mean, think about leaving your home and your kind of environment and going into a shelter where they don't speak your language, they don't have the foods that you eat, and one of the things we do at Thea is we work with all of the mainstream shelters that are here, and we kind of provide that cultural sensitivity training with them. We work hand in hand with their staff, so when one of our clients is staying there, we make sure that they have access to language, to the cultural part of it, like the food even, so that feels a little bit,
It's comfort.
exactly. And then when we get to the point where they're trying to seek independent housing, we can help furnish their apartments, help them with resources like that, so it becomes a home and a safe place for them to be.
What steps should someone take if they are in an abusive relationship?
I think making that first call is the hardest thing, right? Making that call, like having the courage to know that someone is on the other side that's going to listen and that understands. I think as a community, we have to stop not talking about it. We need to be vocal here. And 1 in 3 and 1 in 4, like that means it's affecting someone that you know or love, or yourself, a family member or a loved one. And so we need to change how we look and we think about this topic. I hate to say this, but if it was a physical illness, those numbers would be like highly exaggerated in the community. But because it's a topic that somehow is stigmatized and shameful, we don't bring that level of attention to it. And so we need to start doing that, start that dialogue.
I mean, something as common as hypertension in our community, like, you know?
Yeah.
And the thing is that also those national averages, right? Those 1 in 3, 1 in 4, they're typically like higher percentages for South Asians specifically. And especially they don't, again, involve the kinds of even abuse that we were talking about when it comes to like spiritual, technological, in-law.
Yeah.
And so when we're thinking about it, even like, again, not to say that we are the problem, but it's really just saying that we need to really talk about it so that we take care of our own, you know?
And if you see it, speak up on it.
Exactly.
Absolutely. That's what we'd like is a zero tolerance policy towards violence. And as Ms. Biss said, like the statistics are staggering in the South Asian community. It's more like for the U.S. born or U.S. South Asians that living here, it's around 40%. And studies in India have shown like closer to 70-80% of individuals have faced some type of intimate partner violence in their lifetime. So it's more likely than it's not that it's happening.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, how can friends and family best support someone who is experiencing domestic violence?
I think having a non-judgmental attitude, right? Being that ear. I think a lot of times we have friendships and we want to give advice and we want to tell someone, oh, do this or do that. And I think hold back on that a little bit, provide support, hear the person out, like where are you in this and what do you need from me and how can I best support you? I always tell friends too, like even if someone's in a physical situation, they're not wanting to leave, help them document it just on the side yourself, because again, if they get to the point where they want to look into those legal protections, like someone has documented it and been a witness to it, but really just being supportive, being that voice, knowing that if they leave and they come back, you're going to be there regardless of what they're going through and that you understand that.
And then also, I think before all of that, I think we also need to be educated as a population about abuse in general, about like how to not even navigate, but it's really just like how does it show, like even listening in on this conversation, right? Like doing things where you are becoming more educated on the topic so that when the topic comes up and it's your friend and like you do have something in the back of your brain to like kind of remember and recall and do something about with, if that makes sense, where it's like because a lot of the times whenever somebody tells you this traumatic situation that's happening to your friend, right, you're gonna react and like you're gonna react emotionally, you're gonna react on instinct, and sometimes our instincts are amazing, but sometimes they're really not what we need at that moment. Right? And so when you have like a wealth of knowledge to a topic, you're more easily like able to kind of refer back to it even in a space of emotional like reaction.
Right.
And so when you are educated on a topic, when you kind of even deal with your own shame regarding it, when you deal with your own taboos and what you've been taught, and kind of do all of that self-reflection when that comes with education, you're also able to be more supportive and be a listening ear, know how to be non-judgmental. So education, again, we're prevention. I'm prevention here. So, it really is about what does it take to educate, and how does one educate themselves, and what does one do with that education in order to support your community, your friends, your loved ones.
And we don't expect everyone to be an expert
No.
in that. You know, come to us. We're a resource. You don't have to be the person going through it to be able to call us. Like, we are here for the community as a resource to educate and provide those prevention services as well.
You'll probably just get me talking for an hour with you, and so if you don't want that, maybe not. I'm just kidding. But it'll be somebody on staff who talks to you, who maybe can do a training for your workplace, who can come out and like just have a conversation with you. Really, it can be as casual as we go to Raja Sweets and we sit down and we talk for a while, and we want to start doing those community conversations too. Kind of not to like already spoil some of our plans, but that's something that we really hope that we can be there for. When we talk about a community bedrock, when we talk about a foundation in our community, we want to be that accessible, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Wow. So, how do we stop violence and harm in our communities?
Yeah, well, if we are doing our job right, in 10, 15 years, they wouldn't be here.
Yeah.
But until then, we're going to do everything we can. And Miss Mrs. They don't want to spoil. I will spoil away. I am very proud of what is going to happen for our community with the helm of this topic. Like, we want to be out and vocal in the community. We want to provide a lot of prevention and education. And it doesn't necessarily just have to be on domestic violence specifically. We want to talk about healthy relationships, how to communicate effectively with your partner, how to relearn some of those maladaptive coping techniques. Like, we all face some type of emotional dysregulation, right? Where we can all use that education and help on how to react more appropriately in a heated situation. Techniques like that, healthy coping and wellness in general, like how to deal with stress appropriately, things like that. And then definitely all of our initiatives for our next generation. I really want to push, and Thea really wants to push, like, education for our children, because they are growing up in these homes, witnessing it, experiencing it, living it alongside us. And so we don't want this to be their cycle and their kids' cycle. So we want to provide that intervention to them. Bullying in children, how do parents cope when your kids are being bullied at school? And in a more scary environment, like, how are you dealing when your kid is the bully, you know? And so we want to provide all of that education, and we have some amazing community members that are going to partner with us to help provide that education as well. And so that's what you can see coming from Thea, is being more vocal and being more out there and providing that education for all.
And not to spoil that like really great ending moment, but one thing that I also want to emphasize is that we'll do it in a culturally specific manner. I think a lot of the times when people, especially like me, like I even thought that this was all American stuff, you know, like we grew up, like I'm an immigrant, like I moved here to the US. Even though I sound how I sound, I moved to the U.S. and like my family and I, we have this great divide between what does it mean to be American versus what does it mean to be South Asian, right? And so to never lose that South Asianness and to do it always in a way where you're not diminishing that South Asian side of you in any particular way, that's the key part. Because again, a lot of the times even like migration and immigration is traumatic sometimes. Moving your, like we talk about moving from your home, like that's what you have to do in order to migrate here, right? So to kind of talk about that, talk about what does it mean to be like South Asian in America, like that's also part of it, and how to do everything in a culturally specific manner, even healthy relationships.
Absolutely.
You know?
Well, the time is just flown. And I want to sit here for another hour and talk to you ladies. It's just been so amazing. You guys are wonderful, and I thank you. And it's so nice to meet you. Thank you so much for coming on our show.
Thank you so much.
It was really nice meeting you too. I love your energy. Thank you for listening to us here on Chai Time on 103.5 Hum FM. We will see you next week, same time, same place. Bye.